welcome to your deep dive into ancient India. Get ready to travel back in time with us. We're going to uncover the complexities of early Indian society.
It's amazing what we can learn about daily life from thousands of years ago. Their societal structures. It's really like looking through a window into the past.
Right. Okay, so imagine the Indian subcontinent. You've got, the Himalayas, and then you have the Indus and Ganges rivers. We're focusing on a period starting around 1500 BCE. This is when the Vedic civilization was rising. They really set the foundation for so much of Indian culture and religion today.
And the Vedic period, it's like a foundation for ideas. So many practices we see today, they have roots in this time. It's a testament to the power of culture and tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. And our main source of information about this era is the Vedas. And these aren't just historical documents, they're sacred scriptures in Hinduism. They give us a direct look into the beliefs, rituals, and even social norms of the Vedic people.
Oh, the Vedas are incredible. They're filled with hymns and prayers, rituals, even philosophical thoughts. It's like we can understand how they saw the world. There are four main Vedas: the Rig Veda, the Samaveda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. Each Veda offers unique insights.
So, for example, the Rig Veda, the oldest one, focuses on hymns, praising different deities. It shows us the importance of ritual and that complex relationship between humans and the divine.
Exactly. And the Samaveda, that's focused on melodies and chants. We get a sense of their religious practices, the soundscape of their rituals.
It's really interesting.
The Yajurveda outlines the procedures for sacrifices. It really highlights all those intricate details and symbolism in their beliefs.
It's amazing how intricate these practices were.
Oh, absolutely.
And the Atharva Veda, that one deals with more practical matters. Things like healing and magic, even warding off evil. It's interesting to get that glimpse into their everyday concerns.
Right, their everyday beliefs.
Now, how do we reconstruct a social structure from thousands of years ago? I mean, it's challenging, but the Vedas do offer some clues. One of the most interesting things about Vedic society was the concept of Varna. It's the basis of their social hierarchy.
Yeah, Varna. It's often seen as a rigid caste system, but at least in the early Vedic period, it wasn't completely inflexible.
Right. Wasn't there some movement between these groups?
Exactly. You could move between Varnas. It depended on your skills and contributions. It was more dynamic than it's often portrayed.
Okay. So to clarify, the term Varna literally means color. And it was used to classify people into four groups: the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. So the Brahmanas were the priests and scholars responsible for rituals, preserving knowledge. Then the Kshatriyas were the warriors and rulers. Their job was protecting the community, keeping order.
Yes, and the Vaishyas, they were the merchants and traders, driving the economy. And the Shudras represented the laborers and service providers. They ensured everything ran smoothly in daily life. Each Varna was important for maintaining balance in Vedic society.
Yeah, like each part was essential.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder what daily life was actually like back then. Did they have time for art? Or, I don't know, leisure, personal expression, amidst these defined social roles?
Family was very important in Vedic society, and it was a patriarchal system. The eldest male had authority. The joint family system was also very common, multiple generations living together. It provided stability and support.
I can see that.
Elders made the decisions.
That close-knit family structure, I imagine that could be a source of strength, but also maybe conflict sometimes.
Oh, definitely, just like in families today. And the Vedas paint a complicated picture when it comes to women. On one hand, women participated in religious ceremonies. They even composed hymns, and in some cases, chose their husbands.
Wow, that's surprisingly progressive for a society from that time.
It does challenge our assumptions. But we need to acknowledge the patriarchal structure limited women's roles. Generally, their lives were centered around the household, raising children, though it probably varied based on social standing, individual circumstances too.
Right. That makes sense. History is rarely simple.
Never. There's always nuance.
Always layers of complexity.
Absolutely.
So what kept their economy going? Were they farmers, traders? What was their focus?
Their economy was based on a combination of pastoralism and agriculture.
Okay, a mix.
Cattle were really important, a source of wealth and food. They even used them in sacrifices. Land ownership was also very important. And actually, the Vedas described conflicts over both land and cattle. It shows how important these resources were.
So cattle were almost like the ancient equivalent of gold, a sign of status.
That's a good way to put it. And as they moved east, agriculture became more important. They cultivated barley, wheat, rice, they were in the Fuddle River valleys. And that shift to agriculture probably had big social and economic consequences. But, historians are still figuring out the details.
That's fascinating. So like a historical puzzle.
Yeah, exactly.
What about trade? I mean, did they have a system for exchanging goods?
Early on, trade was limited. They used the barter system, directly exchanging goods for other goods.
Makes sense.
But as settlements grew and crafts developed, trade networks started to expand. We see pottery, weaving, and metalworking becoming more specialized.
So their economy was getting more complex.
Exactly.
Did they use currency?
Okay.
Or was it all bartering?
Coins came later.
Okay, so no coins yet.
Some scholars think cattle might have been a kind of early form of currency because they were so valuable.
Interesting. Measuring your wealth in cows.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about social structure, family life, even their economy.
Mm.
What about politics? How are these communities organized? Do they have, like, kings or councils?
It actually evolved over time. We see evidence of small tribal chiefdoms early on,
Yeah.
each one led by a Raja or king.
So like a cluster of villages under one leader.
Right. And as these groups interacted, sometimes clashed, we see a shift towards larger, more complex political structures. The Raja's role became more formal. He would be advised by a council of elders, almost like a proto-parliament. Warfare also played a role. Chariots were really important in battle. The Kshatriyas, remember, they were the warriors.
Oh, right. So they were in charge of defending the kingdom.
Exactly.
So were there these like epic chariot battles with, warriors fighting for power?
Well, the Vedas do describe it. It was a society that was always changing.
Always in flux.
Yeah. They also had these assemblies called Sabhas and Samitas. While they didn't directly govern, they seem to have represented different groups within the community.
So maybe a form of early democratic participation.
It's possible. It definitely suggests a more complex system than just one ruler.
Yeah, more nuanced. It's interesting to think about these assemblies. Were they like places for debate and discussion?
I think that's likely a space for dialogue, reaching consensus. It gives us a glimpse into their political landscape. Really fascinating.
This deep dive is really starting to paint a vivid picture of Vedic society. But we haven't really touched on spiritual beliefs yet. What gods did they worship? What rituals did they practice? Tell us about the religious landscape of ancient India.
Okay, let's delve into the sacred. The Vedic people were polytheistic, meaning they believed in multiple gods. Each god had their own powers and domains.
Right, like a pantheon of gods.
Exactly, like a cosmic drama playing out. Some of the key figures were Indra, the god of thunder and war, Agni, the god of fire, and Surya, the sun god.
Those sound like powerful gods. How did the Vedic people interact with them? I mean, did they build temples, offer sacrifices? What were their practices?
Sacrifices and rituals were really important in their religious practice. These ceremonies, often involving fire, offerings of food and drink, chanting from the Vedas, were conducted by the Brahmanas.
So the Brahmanas were like the priests, right? Leading these ceremonies.
Yes, exactly.
And these rituals, I mean, they weren't just about personal belief. They were public events to invoke the favor of the gods.
You could say that. They believed these rituals were essential for the community's well-being, for the well-being of the entire universe. They thought if they performed the rituals correctly, they maintained a balance, a harmony between humans and the divine.
That's a pretty powerful idea, that human actions could have such cosmic consequences. It makes you wonder what those rituals must have felt like to witness.
I know. The sights, the sounds, the smells, it must have been quite an experience. And it's important to remember that beliefs weren't static. Vedic society went through big changes, which also affected their religious practices and beliefs.
Changes and transformations. That sounds like a story for our next deep dive. Stay tuned as we explore how Vedic society evolved. We'll uncover the new ideas and challenges they faced.
Before we move on, I wanted to mention this fascinating concept. We see it in the later Vedic texts, the idea of Ruta.
Rita. I don't think we've talked about that yet. What does it mean, and why is it important in their beliefs?
So Rita refers to like a principle of cosmic order. It's like a universal law that governs everything, from the natural world to human behavior, even how the cosmos works.
Oh, okay. So it's like an invisible force keeping everything in balance, making sure the universe is in harmony.
Exactly. The Vedic people believed that maintaining this cosmic order, this Rita, was essential for everything. It tied into the rituals and sacrifices they performed, the ones done by the Brahmanas.
Ah, okay. So by performing those ceremonies, they believed they were upholding this cosmic order, maintaining balance between humans and the divine.
Precisely. Like a cosmic dance. Humans and gods, both playing their parts. And this idea of balance extended to other parts of their society too, even their social structure.
You're talking about the Varna system, right? How did that hierarchy contribute to maintaining Kruta?
Well, today we might see a system like that as unequal. But from their perspective, each Varna had specific duties, everyone contributing to the harmony of society.
Right, so each group had a role in upholding Kruta. The Brahmanas with their knowledge, the Kshatriyas with protection and governance, the Vaishyas through the economy, and the Shudras with their service and labor.
Yes. Each person's place was about fulfilling a purpose, contributing to the greater good of the universe. But we've been talking about the Vedic period as a whole. It's important to remember that societies change over time, and the Vedic society went through some significant transformations, and that concept probably evolved as well.
Right, societies are always adapting. So what were some of the big developments in the later Vedic period, and how did they change their worldview?
Well, one major development was their expansion eastward. They moved from the Indus River Valley to the Gangetic Plain.
Oh, wow, a whole new region.
That region would become so important to ancient India. This migration brought them into contact with new cultures and environments, so we start to see a mixing of traditions and beliefs.
It's fascinating to imagine those encounters, how they incorporated new ideas into their existing beliefs. Did it affect their religion?
Definitely. We see a shift in focus. They move away from those earlier nature gods, like Indra and Agni. Instead, they start focusing on deities like Prajapati, the creator god, and Vishnu, the preserver.
So their focus changed as they moved to a new area. It's like their religious beliefs adapted to the new circumstances.
Exactly. And this laid the groundwork for the Hindu trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. That becomes central to Hinduism later on.
Wow. It's amazing to see those early beliefs evolving into a major world religion.
It really is.
So we talked about eastward expansion and cultural mixing. What about politics? Did kingship change as they settled in new areas?
Oh, yes. We see larger, more complex kingdoms in the Gangetic Plain. The Raja becomes much more powerful. There were elaborate rituals and ceremonies associated with kingship. It emphasized the idea of a divine right to rule.
So more like a king than a chieftain.
Right. And this emphasis on royal authority led to more complex administration. They needed officials to help the Raja manage the growing kingdom.
It sounds like things were getting much more organized.
Definitely. We're seeing a shift from those simpler chiefdoms to something more like, well, the kingdoms and empires we think of.
A real change in scale.
Exactly.
But with all these changes, did their core values stay the same? I mean, the Varna system, the rituals, were those still important?
Well, the Varna system did evolve, but it was still the framework for social organization, and rituals remained very important. They reinforced those beliefs, connected people to the cosmic order.
So even with all the changes, some things stayed the same. A thread connecting their past to the present.
I like that, a thread. And these enduring elements would go on to influence Indian culture for centuries, even as new religions and philosophies came up.
It's amazing how these things continue to have an impact.
It is.
So we've learned a lot about Vedic society. But I'm curious, what was it like to actually live in that time? Did they have music, art? What did they do besides rituals and work?
That's a great question. And the Vedic texts give us some clues. Music was important, for example. The Samaveda, remember, it focuses on melodies and chants. So music was key for ceremonies and rituals, but it was probably also part of everyday life, for entertainment.
Right. It's easy to imagine people gathering, listening to music, telling stories.
Exactly. And speaking of stories, literature was also vibrant. I mean, the Vedas themselves show how skilled they were with language. There's poetry, imagery, deep insights into their worldview. We have hymns, prayers, myths, legends, even philosophical dialogues.
It's like having a direct link to their thoughts and feelings.
In a way, yes.
What about visual arts? Did they do any sculpting or painting?
Well, this was before the time of those grand temples and sculptures. But we do have evidence of pottery, jewelry, even decorative art. Think about the skill it took to create those things.
So we can still get a sense of their artistic side.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how much we can learn about a culture from the things they made.
It really is. And it reminds us that art connects us across time.
It's a powerful thing. So it's clear that Vedic culture had a huge impact on India, but as we've seen, there was a lot of change during this time. Were there other big developments that happened as the Vedic period ended? What set the stage for what came next?
Well, politically, we see new kingdoms and powerful rulers competing. One big development was the rise of the Kuru kingdom. They were a major force.
Oh, the Kuru Kingdom. They're important in the Mahabharata, right?
Exactly. The Mahabharata, one of India's great epics, blends history, mythology, and philosophy. And the Kurus are a big part of the story. They were powerful militarily and politically.
It's like a real-life epic.
Yes, full of ambition, power struggles. And this political upheaval happened alongside major philosophical and spiritual changes. As we move toward the end of the Vedic period, around 600 BCE, people are questioning things. New ideas are challenging the established order. It was a time ripe for change.
A time for new ways of thinking.
Exactly.
And those new ways of thinking had a huge impact on India, didn't they? It's like we're at a turning point, moving from the Vedic period to the rise of empires and the emergence of Buddhism and Jainism.
Yes, exactly. And we'll explore those in the last part of our deep dive. We'll uncover how these transformative periods connect. And we'll delve into the events that shaped Indian history and culture.
Okay, so welcome back to our deep dive. We've gone through so much of the Vedic period. You know, their social structures, religious beliefs, political changes. But as we're getting to the end of this era, around 600 BCE, things are shifting in India.
Yeah, it's like a turning point in history. The old ways are making way for new ideas, new powers, even new ways of understanding the world.
Yeah. We were talking about political changes, new kingdoms rising. Can you tell us more about how this shaped ancient India?
Sure. So in the later Vedic period, we see these larger, more powerful states emerging. They were called Mahajanapadas. It basically means great realm or great territory.
Okay. Mahajanapada. So these were different from the earlier forms of government.
Oh, definitely. They had larger territories, more organized armies, and there was a shift toward more centralized power.
So things were getting more complex.
Exactly. They often had a capital city, a standing army, and a more developed administration to manage everything.
Wow, that's a big change. Were there many of these Mahajanapadas? Or was it just a few?
Well, the ancient texts talk about 16 major ones in northern India. Some were monarchies, others republics. Each one was unique. But two really important ones were Magadha and Kosala. They were powerful, and they had a big impact on this era.
Magadha. Didn't that become the center of, like, some of the big empires, like the Mauryan Empire?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. But before we get to the empires, let's talk about why Magadha became so powerful during this time. It was a few things. They had a strategic location right in the fertile Gangetic Plain. They also had access to iron ore, which they used for weapons. And they had ambitious rulers who really wanted to expand their territory.
It's like they had everything they needed. Resources, location, and strong leaders.
Yeah, pretty much.
What about Kosala? Where did they fit in?
They were northwest of Magadha, known for their strong military, and they had a good economy. Kosala was also a center for learning and culture. Their rulers supported the arts and philosophy.
So, kind of a balance. Magadha had the power, and Kosala had the intellectual side.
You could say that.
Did these two Mahajanapadas get along, or was there conflict?
Well, there was definitely competition. They fought over territory, resources, that sort of thing. The Vedic texts, especially the later ones, are full of stories about battles, political maneuvering, all these shifting alliances. It was a very dynamic period.
It sounds like a very exciting time to be alive.
In some ways, maybe.
So as these Mahajanapadas were growing and fighting, were there social and cultural changes happening too? Did the Vedic way of life stay the same?
Well, the Vedic traditions were still important, of course, but this period also saw a major shift in religion and philosophy. Around the 6th century BCE, new faiths challenged the old order.
This is where it gets interesting. We talked about those philosophical ideas in the Upanishads, a kind of shift in religious thought. Is this when Buddhism and Jainism came about?
Yes. It was a time of great spiritual change. People were questioning the old ways, looking for new paths to salvation. Buddhism and Jainism, they both emerged around the 6th century BCE, and they offered radical new perspectives on suffering, enlightenment, the meaning of life.
So these new religions were offering something different from the Vedic traditions.
Oh, very different. Buddhism, for example, focused on understanding reality and living ethically. It was about mental discipline and wisdom, not so much about pleasing gods through rituals.
It sounds more focused on, like, personal growth.
Right. It was about a journey of self-discovery.
What were the main ideas of Buddhism? What made it appealing?
So Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who became known as the Buddha. He taught that suffering comes from attachment to desires. And to be truly liberated, to reach nirvana, you have to let go of those attachments. He outlined the Eightfold Path, as a way to reach enlightenment.
Oh, right. The Eightfold Path. Can you explain what that is?
It basically covers every aspect of life. It guides you toward right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration.
It's about living a more mindful life. It's actually pretty relevant today, don't you think?
Absolutely. And Buddhism also challenged the social hierarchy, the Varna system. It offered a path to liberation that was open to everyone, regardless of their social status.
So it was a spiritual revolution and a social one, too.
Exactly. That's probably one reason it became so popular, especially among people who felt marginalized.
And what about Jainism? How was it different?
Like Buddhism, Jainism rejected Vedic rituals and emphasized enlightenment. But it took a more radical approach. Their central idea was ahimsa, nonviolence.
Nonviolence. So not just not harming others, but like all living beings.
Yes, everything. Jains believe that all creatures have a soul and deserve respect. They are vegetarian, of course. They even try not to harm plants unnecessarily.
That's amazing. It makes you think about how we treat the environment.
I agree. It's really a deep respect for all life.
So we have these two new religions, Buddhism and Jainism, coming up during a time of big changes. How did they fit in with the existing religious order? Did they get along?
It was complicated. They challenged some Vedic ideas, but they also adopted others. For example, the concepts of karma and reincarnation, those were from the Upanishads, and they became central to both Buddhism and Jainism.
So it wasn't a complete rejection of the old ways.
No, it was more like an evolution.
It sounds like the religious landscape of ancient India was becoming very diverse. How did the rulers of the Mahajanapadas react to these new faiths?
It depended on the ruler. Some embraced the new religions. Ashoka, the Mauryan emperor, converted to Buddhism, and he helped it spread. Other rulers stuck with the Vedic traditions. And some supported multiple religions.
It sounds like a very dynamic period full of new ideas and changes.
It really was. And all these different traditions, new ideas, they shaped Indian history and culture. Our deep dive into ancient India ends here, but this story continues. We can see its legacy in art, literature, philosophy, and religion.
You've given us a lot to think about. We've seen so much. From those early Vedic settlements to the rise of these Mahajanapadas and new religions, ancient India was a place of innovation, creativity, and a lot of wisdom. What aspects of that world do we still see in India today?
Yeah.
That's something to consider. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.